The chill wasn't just in the late October air that was sweeping down High Street, making the shop signs creak on their iron brackets. It was a cold that had started in the pit of my stomach, a knot of ice that formed the exact moment I saw him, my husband, Mark. He was supposed to be at home, tucked into our bed, suffering from the kind of brutal flu that left him groaning and helpless. At least that's what he'd told me on the phone less than an hour ago, his voice a pathetic croak I'd felt a pang of sympathy for. I'd offered to come home from my sister's to make him soup, but he'd insisted I stay away. Don't want you and Lily catching this, love. It's a monster. I'm just going to sleep it off. And I, his loving wife of 12 years, had believed him. I always believed him. Why wouldn't I? But there he was, not a phantom, not a doppelganger, but my Mark. I knew the set of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled just over the collar of his coat. A coat I didn't recognize, a deep charcoal wool that looked expensive. He was standing outside the old jeweler's shop, the one with the dusty velvet boxes in the window, talking to a woman. My first instinct was a hot, shameful flush of jealousy. He was having an affair, the classic, sordid cliché. But as I watched, hidden in the alcove of a closed bakery, the scene felt wrong. It wasn't clandestine or romantic. Their body language was tense, businesslike. The woman was his sister, Claire. My breath caught. Claire lived 3 hours away. What was she doing here, meeting my deathly ill husband on a street corner? She handed him a small, discreet manila envelope. He took it without looking at her, his jaw tight, and slipped it into the inside pocket of that unfamiliar coat. They exchanged a few more clipped words, and then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement, never once looking back. Mark stood there for a moment, his shoulders slumping slightly, before he turned and headed in the opposite direction, toward the car park at the edge of town. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Nothing made sense. The flu, the secret meeting, the strange coat, the envelope. It was a constellation of wrongness. My hand trembled as I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over his name, Mark III. The little heart emoji felt like a mockery now. I pressed call. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, love," he rasped, his voice thick with counterfeit sickness. The performance was flawless. He even coughed, a wet, chesty sound that made my skin crawl. "Everything okay?" I forced my own voice to be steady, light. "Just checking in on my patient." "How are you feeling?" "Ugh, awful," he groaned, and I could almost picture him burrowed under our duvet, a thermometer on the bedside table. Head's pounding. I think I'm running a fever. Here it was. The moment, the precipice. I took a shallow breath, the smell of stale sugar from the bakery filling my lungs. "Where are you right now, Mark?" A slight pause, just a beat. But in that tiny silence, I felt a chasm open up between us. "Where do you think I am, Sarah?" "I'm in bed, haven't moved an inch. I feel like I've been hit by a truck." And I was looking right at him, 100 yards away. As he unlocked his car, the lie echoing in the space between the phone in his hand and the phone pressed to my ear. I saw him get into the driver's seat, the lie hanging in the air, so tangible I felt I could choke on it. He was lying. He was lying to me with such ease, such practiced perfection, that it wasn't just about where he was, it was about everything. What other lies had he told with that same convincing, pathetic tone? How much of the life I thought we'd built together was a stage, and he the lead actor. I saw his car pull out of the space, turning not toward our home, but toward the motorway. Away from me, away from our daughter, Lily. "Okay, honey," I whispered, my throat tight. "You just rest. I'll be home in a little while. I love you too," he mumbled. And then the line went dead. The cold in my stomach spread, a creeping frost moving up my chest, into my throat, behind my eyes. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was fear, a deep, primal fear that had nothing to do with infidelity and everything to do with that manila envelope, the tense set of his jaw, and the chilling ease of his lie. What was he doing, and why did it feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground beneath my feet was starting to crumble? The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and gray tarmac, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Mark's face, tight with a stress I didn't recognize. Claire's sharp, angular presence, a bird of ill omen. The envelope. It was always the envelope. What was in it? Money? Documents? Something else entirely? By the time I pulled into our driveway, his car was already there, parked in its usual spot. My own lie, the one about being at my sister's, had given him just enough of a head start. The house looked the same as it always did. The cheerful yellow door, the potted geraniums I'd fussed over all summer, the small bicycle belonging to our 8-year-old daughter, Lily, leaning against the wall. It was a portrait of domestic peace, a lie. I walked in, my keys silent in my hand. The house was quiet, filled with a heavy, stuffy air of feigned sickness. I crept up the stairs, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. There he was, under the thick quilt, his breathing theatrical and shallow. The charcoal wool coat was nowhere to be seen. On the bedside table sat a glass of water and a box of tissues. He had constructed his stage perfectly. He stirred as I entered, blinking his eyes open with a performance of groggy effort. "Sarah, you're home." His voice was still that gravelly, imitation of illness. "How are you feeling?" I asked, my voice a stranger's in my own ears. I walked over to the bed, my gaze sweeping the room. Where had he hidden the coat, the envelope? "Like death," he mumbled, reaching a hand out for mine. His skin was cool and dry, no fever, not a hint of one. I let him take my hand, my fingers limp and cold in his. His touch, which had been my anchor for 12 years, now felt like a brand. "You poor thing," I said, stroking his hair. It was a gesture I'd made 1,000 times, but now it felt like I was touching a stranger. His eyes, the warm brown eyes I had fallen in love with, looked back at me, but they were shuttered. He was hiding in plain sight. I thought about our daughter Lily, who was at a sleepover at her friend's house. Thank God for that. Thank God she wasn't here to see the cracks forming in the foundation of our world. Lily with her bright laugh and her fragile health. She'd been born with a rare cardiac condition, a tiny flaw in her perfect heart that required constant monitoring and medication. Our lives revolved around her well-being, a delicate dance of appointments and precautions. Mark had always been the worrier, the one who would wake in the night to check her breathing, the one who researched every new treatment with a fierce protective energy. Or so I thought. Was that a lie too? Was his concern just another part of the performance? I needed to find that coat. I needed to know what was in that envelope. "I'm going to make you some soup," I said, pulling my hand away. "You just try to sleep." He nodded, closing his eyes with a sigh of relief that was all too real. He thought he'd gotten away with it, He thought I was the same trusting, slightly naive Sarah I had always been. But the woman who saw him on High Street was gone. In her place was someone else, someone colder, sharper, someone who knew she was sleeping next to an enemy. As I went downstairs to the kitchen, the clatter of the pot on the stove was the only sound. I wasn't just making soup, I was buying time. Time to search, time to think. The game had changed, and I was the only one who knew we were playing. What kind of man lies to his wife about being sick while conducting secret business with his sister? And what kind of secrets require such elaborate deception? The questions circled in my head, dark birds of prey, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the answers were hidden somewhere in this house, and finding them might destroy everything I held dear. The charade continued for the rest of the evening. I brought him a tray with soup and toast, which he picked at with theatrical listlessness. I felt his forehead for a fever he didn't have, my touch a lie mirroring his own. He'd ask for another blanket, his voice a weak rasp, and I'd fetch it, my movements calm and measured, while a storm raged inside me. Every word, every gesture was a move in a game. I was only just beginning to understand. The first rule, I decided, was to become a ghost in my own home. To watch, to listen, to search, all while maintaining the placid surface of our life. Once he was asleep, his breathing deep and even, another part of the act, I was sure, I began my search. I started with the obvious places, his wardrobe, the pockets of his regular coats, his jeans from the laundry basket. Nothing, no charcoal coat, no manila envelope. It was as if the man I'd seen in town had been an apparition, a figment of my stressed imagination. But I knew what I saw. The image was burned into my mind. I moved to his office, a small room at the back of the house, where he managed our family's finances. Mark was an investment advisor, a job that suited his meticulous, detail-oriented nature, or so I thought. Now his neat stacks of paper and organized files seemed less like signs of a tidy mind and more like a carefully constructed facade. I sat in his leather chair, the worn material cool against my skin. The room smelled of him, of paper and faint, woodsy cologne. It used to be a comforting scent. Now it felt alien. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. A receipt for an expensive coat? A train ticket for Claire? I started with the shredder bin. My hands trembled as I sifted through the thin strips of paper. A desperate, pathetic act. But what if he'd shredded something important? It was a dead end, just junk mail and old utility bills. Next, the computer. It was password protected, of course. For 12 years, we'd shared everything. We knew each other's passwords, PINs, the silly little secrets that stitch two lives together. I typed in the one he always used, Lily's birthday, followed by the name of his childhood dog. Access denied. My blood ran cold. He'd changed it. When and why? The wall between us was no longer just emotional. It was digital. It was deliberate. I tried a few more variations, my panic growing with each failed attempt. The names of our favorite songs, our anniversary, the place we first met. Nothing. He had locked me out of our shared life. Defeated, I turned back to the room itself. I ran my hands under the desk, along the backs of the bookshelves, behind the framed photos of Lily and me that sat on his credenza, photos of a smiling, happy family. Was he looking at my face every day while plotting, what? I stopped, my fingers brushing against the edge of a loose floorboard tucked away behind a filing cabinet. My heart leaped. It was an old house, full of quirks, but this board felt different. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the rug. Using my fingernails, I managed to pry the edge up. It lifted with a soft groan of old wood. Beneath it was a small dark cavity, and inside that cavity, nestled in the dusty space between the floor joists, was the charcoal wool coat. It was folded neatly, a dark, sleeping animal. My breath hitched. I was right. I wasn't crazy. I pulled it out. The wool was soft and expensive, far nicer than anything Mark would normally buy for himself. He was always so frugal, scolding me gently for buying a brand-name coffee or a hardcover book. "We have to be careful, Sarah," he'd always say, "for Lily's future." The hypocrisy of it was a physical blow. I plunged my hand into the inside pocket, the same one I'd seen him use earlier. My fingers closed around the manila envelope. It was thin, surprisingly light. I sat back on my heels, the coat pooled in my lap, and pulled out the contents. It wasn't money, it wasn't documents, it was a set of photographs, glossy 5x7 prints. The first one was of a car, a dark blue sedan, its front end crumpled like a discarded piece of paper. The second was of a winding country road, slick with rain, bordered by a deep wooded ditch. The third made me drop the rest. It was a picture of a man lying beside the wrecked car. He was older, with graying hair and a kind face I vaguely recognized. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the overcast sky. A small trickle of blood ran from his temple. I shuffled through the rest of the photos with numb fingers, close-ups of the car's tires, a shot of the ditch, and then a final chilling image, a printed-out hospital report. I scanned the page, my eyes catching on the name at the top, Mr. Alistair Finch. The date was from 6 months ago. Cause of death, vehicular accident due to brake failure. Alistair Finch. The name echoed in my memory. He was a client of Mark's, a wealthy widower with no children. Mark had spoken of him, mentioning how sad it was when he died so suddenly. He'd handled the man's estate, a complex portfolio of stocks and properties. A tragedy, Mark had called it, shaking his head. His brakes just gave out on that old country road. I looked at the photo of the slick road, the deep ditch, brake failure. Or had he been run off the road? I had no proof, just a collection of morbid photos and a cold knot of dread in my stomach. But why would Mark have these? Why would Claire deliver them? What did this have to do with us? I carefully placed the photos back in the envelope, tucked it into the coat, and returned everything to the dark space beneath the floor. As I fitted the board back into place, a memory surfaced unbidden. It was from about a month after Mr. Finch's death. Mark had come home one evening, his face alight with a rare, unrestrained joy. "I did it, Sarah. I landed the Harrington account." The Harrington account was a massive, prestigious fund that had catapulted Mark's career into a new league. It meant a huge commission, a bonus that had allowed us to finally pay off a chunk of our mortgage and set up a more substantial medical trust for Lily. At the time, I'd been thrilled for him. We'd celebrated with champagne, and he'd held me close, whispering about how everything was finally going to be okay, how we'd never have to worry about money again. "It's all for you and Lily," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. Now the memory was tainted, poisoned by the images in the envelope. Was there a connection? Had Mr. Finch's death somehow paved the way for Mark to get that account? It seemed insane, a plot from a cheap thriller, but the cold, hard evidence was hidden a few feet away from me. My husband, the careful, loving father and provider, was a man who hid secret coats and photographs of dead bodies. The man sleeping in my bed wasn't just a liar, he was something much, much darker. I crept back upstairs, my body moving on autopilot. I slipped into bed beside him, the space between us feeling like a mile-wide canyon. I lay there, rigid, staring into the darkness, my mind racing. The lie about the flu wasn't just a lie. It was a cover for a conspiracy, and his sister, my sister-in-law, was in on it. But why now? Why was Claire delivering those old photos? Were they blackmail? A reminder? A threat? Every possibility was more terrifying than the last. I listened to the sound of his breathing, the slow, even rhythm of the man I thought I knew. But now another sound was layered over it, the silent, sightless stare of a dead man, the screech of failing brakes on a wet road. I had to know more. I had to understand what I was living with, for my own safety, and more importantly, for Lily's. My investigation had just begun, and it was no longer about a simple lie. It was about life and death. The next few days were a masterclass in deception, a suffocating domestic ballet where I played the part of the devoted wife to a man I now suspected of unspeakable things. Mark's flu miraculously cleared up within 48 hours. He returned to his usual routine, a little more attentive than usual, as if to compensate for his brief illness. He'd bring me coffee in the morning, kiss my cheek, and ask about my day with an interested tilt of his head. Each gesture of affection felt like a carefully placed stone, building a wall of normalcy around the dark secret hidden under his office floor. I, in turn, perfected my role. I was warm, unsuspecting Sarah. I smiled, I laughed at his jokes, I discussed school fundraisers and Lily's upcoming cardiology appointment. But beneath the surface, I was a different person. I was a detective, a spy in my own life. My senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. I analyzed every word he said, every hesitation, every glance. I was searching for cracks in his composure, for any flicker of the man I'd seen on High Street. The photographs of Alistair Finch were a constant, silent scream in the back of my mind. I needed context. I needed to know why Mark had them. My first move was to try the computer again. I spent an entire afternoon while he was at work and Lily was at school trying to guess his new password. I typed in every combination I could think of. Claire's birthday, the make of his first car, the name of the street he grew up on. Nothing. He had chosen something completely disconnected from his life, something I would never guess. The digital fortress was impenetrable. I had to find another way in. I turned my attention to his phone. He had a new habit of keeping it with him at all times, even when he went to the bathroom. It never left his sight, but he was a creature of habit. Every night, he plugged it in to charge on his bedside table, just inches from where I pretended to sleep. One night, I waited until he was in a deep, genuine sleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly, carefully reached across the space between us. My fingers brushed the cool glass of the screen. I lifted it, the motion so slow it was almost imperceptible. I held my breath, watching his face in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. He didn't stir. I slipped out of bed and took the phone into the master bathroom, closing the door with a soft click. I turned on the small vanity light, my hand shaking so much I could barely hold the device steady. It was locked with a passcode, of course, a 6-digit numerical code. My mind raced. Lily's birthday was 6 digits. I typed it in, 041115. Try again in 1 minute. My hopes sank. I tried our anniversary, 062211. Try again in 5 minutes. Panic began to set in. The phone was a ticking time bomb. Too many failed attempts, and it would disable itself permanently. I had to think like him. What numbers mattered to him? What new secret numbers had entered his life? I thought about the Harrington account, the one that had changed our fortunes. He'd been so proud of it. But I didn't know any numbers associated with it. Then another memory surfaced. It was from a few weeks ago. Lily had been struggling with a new medication, and her heart rate had been erratic. Mark had been hovering over her monitor, his face pale with anxiety. He'd rattled off her baseline numbers to the on-call cardiologist. Her resting rate is usually 72, systolic is 105, diastolic 65. 7,210,565. It was a long shot, a desperate guess born of a memory of parental fear. But maybe, just maybe, his obsession with Lily's health wasn't entirely a lie. Maybe it was twisted up in all of this. I waited for the timer to count down, my own heart beating an unsteady rhythm. I typed in the numbers 7-2-1-0-5-6. The phone unlocked. A wave of relief and nausea washed over me. I was in. I didn't have much time. I went straight to his messages. The recent texts were all innocuous. Work emails, a message from his golf buddy, a reminder about a dentist appointment. I scrolled back through weeks of mundane communication. And then I found it. A thread with Claire. It wasn't under her name. He'd saved her number under C. Finch. A chill went down my spine. He was using the dead man's initial. The messages were terse, almost coded. Claire. Package delivered. As requested. Mark. Acknowledged. Situation contained for now. Claire. He's getting nervous. He called me twice. Wants another payment. Mark. Tell him to be patient. The transfer is scheduled for the 15th, not a day sooner, and tell him to stop calling you. Who was he? Another player in this sordid drama? I scrolled further back to the weeks before the High Street meeting. Claire. We have a problem. He's talking, threatening to go to Finch's insurance company. Mark. He won't. He's just as culpable as we are. Remind him of that. Culpable for what? For Alistair Finch's death? My hands were slick with sweat. This was bigger than I could have imagined. There was a third person involved, someone they were paying for silence. I kept scrolling, my eyes scanning frantically. I found messages from around the time of Mr. Finch's accident 6 months ago. Claire. Is it done? Mark. Yes. Clean. Brake line was severed. Looked like wear and tear. Police report confirms accidental. My stomach lurched. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. My husband, Mark, the man who read bedtime stories to our daughter, who cried at the end of sad movies, had killed a man. He had severed his brake line and sent him careening off a wet road to his death. And his sister had helped him cover it up. The motive clicked into place with sickening clarity. Alistair Finch, the wealthy, childless client. With him out of the way, his massive estate had to be managed. Mark, as his trusted advisor, would have been the natural choice to oversee its liquidation. But that wasn't the real prize. Finch's death must have created a power vacuum, an opportunity. Perhaps Finch was the lead advisor for the Harrington account. With him gone, the account was up for grabs. Mark had seized the opportunity he created. He had murdered a man for a promotion. It was monstrous. It was unbelievable. But the proof was right here, in my hands, in black and white pixels. But that didn't explain the photographs or the new payments. Why was Claire bringing him crime scene photos of a murder he committed? I switched to his photo gallery. Tucked away in a hidden folder, I found more images, not of the crash scene, but screenshots of bank transfers. Huge sums of money moving from an account I didn't recognize into another account under a corporate name, C&M Solutions, C&M Claire and Mark. And then I found the video. It was short, only 30 seconds long, filmed from a distance. It showed the same winding country road from the photographs. A dark blue sedan drove past. A few moments later, a second car followed it, Mark's car. My blood turned to ice. Someone had filmed him. Someone had been there that day. Someone had proof that he wasn't just an opportunistic advisor, but that he had been at the scene of the crime. The mysterious he they were paying off. This person wasn't just a co-conspirator. They were a blackmailer. Claire hadn't delivered the photos as a reminder. She'd delivered them from the blackmailer. They were a threat, a demand for more money. Suddenly, Mark's recent stress, his frayed temper, the secret meeting, it all made sense. Their perfect crime was unraveling. He wasn't in control. He was being bled dry by someone who held his life in their hands. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. He was stirring. My time was up. I quickly deleted the call log to the cardiologist from his recent calls list, closed everything, and locked the phone. I crept back to the bedroom, my body trembling. I slid the phone back onto the charger, my movements a masterpiece of stealth. I got into bed, turning my back to him, my body rigid. He had killed for money, for ambition. He was a murderer, and I was sleeping beside him. The warmth of his body, just inches from mine, felt toxic, a radiating heat of pure evil. My thoughts turned to Lily, our beautiful, fragile daughter. The medical trust he had set up with the blood money from the Harrington account. His obsessive concern for her health. It wasn't love, it was guilt. Or worse, it was a way to control the narrative, to paint himself as the doting father, the man who would do anything for his family. "It's all for you and Lily," he had said. The words were no longer a comfort, they were a condemnation. I knew I couldn't just leave. A man who would kill for a promotion, would do anything to protect his secret. He would never let me take Lily. If he even suspected I knew, what would he be capable of? The answer was terrifyingly clear. He would eliminate the threat. He would eliminate me. The game had shifted once again. This was no longer an investigation. It was a fight for survival. The knowledge of what Mark had done settled into my bones, a permanent, unshakable chill. I was living with a murderer, a man whose capacity for deceit was so profound that it had rendered our entire life together a lie. Every shared meal, every family vacation, every whispered "I love you" was now coated in the grime of his crime. The most terrifying part was how normal he was. He went to work. He helped Lily with her homework. He complained about the neighbor's dog. He was the picture of suburban fatherhood, and only I could see the monster lurking behind his mild-mannered eyes. My priority, my only priority, was Lily. I had to get her away from him, but I couldn't just pack a bag and run. He was smart, he was meticulous, and now I knew he was dangerous. If I disappeared, he would find us, and what story would he tell? That his unstable wife had kidnapped their sick child? The world would believe him. He was the concerned father, the successful provider. I was just a wife. I had no proof. The texts on his phone were damning, but they were on his phone. The photographs were hidden under his floorboards. I had nothing tangible, nothing I could take to the police that wouldn't sound like the paranoid ramblings of a woman in a failing marriage. He had insulated himself perfectly, so I had to formulate a new plan. I couldn't be a runner. I had to be a fighter. I had to gather my own evidence, something undeniable, something that would tear down his carefully constructed world and expose him for what he was. This meant I had to stay. I had to continue the charade, to smile at the man who made my skin crawl, to sleep beside the man who haunted my nightmares. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. The psychological toll was immense. I felt like I was splitting into two people. There was the outward Sarah, who planned Lily's upcoming birthday party and discussed paint colors for the living room with Mark. And there was the inner Sarah, who was constantly calculating, observing, planning her escape. My first step was to find out who the blackmailer was, the mysterious he from the text messages. I started with Mark's client list, which I knew he kept a hard copy of in his desk drawer. I feigned a headache one Saturday morning and stayed home while he took Lily to the park. With my heart pounding, I went into his office and found the list. I scanned the names, my eyes searching for a connection to Alistair Finch. And then I saw it, Leo Vance. The notes next to his name were brief. Low-level associate of AF, handled basic logistics. AF Alistair Finch, Leo Vance. I Googled the name. The first few results were unremarkable. But then I found a local news article from a few months back. Local man charged with embezzlement. The man in the mugshot was younger than I expected, with shifty eyes and a weak chin. The article stated that Leo Vance, a former employee of a logistics firm that had worked with the late Alistair Finch, had been accused of siphoning funds. The charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. It had to be him. He was close enough to Finch to know his routines, his driving routes. Maybe he'd even helped Mark plan the murder, only to get greedy afterward. He had the video, the photos. He was the one pulling the strings. Mark and Claire weren't master criminals. They were panicked amateurs, trapped in a web of their own making, and Leo Vance was the spider. This knowledge gave me a strange sense of power. Mark wasn't an untouchable monster. He was a scared man being backed into a corner. And scared men make mistakes. I needed to create an environment where he would make a fatal one. My strategy began to form, a desperate high-stakes gamble. I had to make him believe I was a threat that needed to be neutralized, but in a way that he couldn't just get rid of me. I had to become a problem he had to solve, with the same cold, calculated logic he'd used on Alistair Finch, and I had to make sure that when he tried, I was ready. I started small. I began asking questions cloaked in innocent curiosity. "I was thinking about Mr. Finch the other day," I said one evening as we were washing dishes. "It's so tragic what happened. Do you know if they ever found out exactly what went wrong with his car?" I watched his face carefully. His hands paused for a fraction of a second in the soapy water. A tiny, almost imperceptible flinch. "Just old age, I think," he said, his voice even. "It was an old car. These things happen. It's just so scary," I pressed on, drying a plate with deliberate care. "You hear about things like that, and it makes you think. About safety, about Lily." I was using Lily, our shield and our vulnerability, as a weapon. It felt disgusting but necessary. His jaw tightened. The car is perfectly safe, Sarah. I get it serviced regularly. A few days later, I brought up Claire. I had the nicest dream about Claire last night, I lied, sipping my morning coffee. It's a shame we don't see her more often. What was she doing in town the other day? The coffee cup in his hand rattled against its saucer. A direct hit. What are you talking about? He asked, his eyes narrowing. She wasn't in town. Oh, I could have sworn I saw someone who looked just like her on High Street, I said with a breezy laugh. Must have been my imagination. I was planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Was I just making innocent conversation, or did I know something? I was becoming a loose thread, a potential unraveling of his entire story. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere between us. The manufactured warmth was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. His attentiveness became surveillance. He started asking me where I was going, who I was talking to. He began checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He was getting paranoid. He was getting scared. The next phase of my plan was the most dangerous. I needed to make him believe I was gathering evidence. One afternoon, I took the envelope of photographs from its hiding place. I didn't take them out of the house. That was too risky. Instead, I took pictures of them with my own phone. I photographed the crash scene, the dead man's face, the hospital report. Then I deleted the photos from my main gallery and used a special app to hide them in a secure, password-protected folder. An app I knew he wouldn't think to look for. Then I put the original envelope back, but not exactly as I'd found it. I left it slightly askew, a corner of one of the photographs peeking out. A deliberate, careless mistake. A sign that someone had been there. I knew he was meticulous. I knew he would check on his secret. I was setting a trap, and I could only pray he would walk into it. That night, the tension in the house was unbearable. After I put Lily to bed, I came downstairs to find Mark in his office, the door closed. I waited. After about 20 minutes, he came out, his face pale, his expression grim. He had found it. He knew someone had been in his hiding spot. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. Is everything all right, Sarah? The question was a threat. Everything's fine, I said, my voice shaking slightly. It was the first time my mask had slipped. He noticed. A flicker of something dark and decisive passed through his eyes. It was the look of a man who has identified a problem and is already working on the solution. I went to bed that night with a profound sense of terror and a sliver of grim satisfaction. He was rattled, he was cornered, and I knew with a dreadful certainty that he would act soon. My life was now in imminent danger, but I was ready. I had my own secrets now. I had the photos on my phone, and I had a plan. The next day, I made a quiet trip to an electronics store and bought the 2 smallest, highest quality, voice-activated recorders I could find. The game was escalating, and I was about to make my next move. The days that followed were lived on a knife's edge. The air in our home was thick with unspoken accusations and silent threats. Mark watched me constantly, his gaze a physical weight. He would come up behind me while I was cooking, making me jump. He would pick up my phone and casually scroll through it, a thin smile on his lips, looking for the evidence he was now certain I possessed. I let him look. I knew he wouldn't find the hidden folder. My apparent carelessness was my shield. He saw me as sloppy, emotional, not a genuine threat, but a liability that needed to be managed. This was his fatal flaw, his arrogance. He underestimated me. He always had. I knew he was communicating with Claire more frequently. I'd see him step into another room to take a call, his voice a low, urgent murmur. I couldn't risk taking his phone again. He was too vigilant now. But I didn't need to. I had my own tools. The voice recorders were my secret weapon. They were tiny, no bigger than a paperclip. I placed one of them under the lip of his desk in the office, secured with a piece of double-sided tape. It was in the perfect position to capture any phone calls he made while sitting there. The second one was my personal insurance policy. I kept it in the pocket of my jeans or my dressing gown at all times. If he confronted me, if he threatened me, I would have a record. My strategy was no longer just about gathering evidence of a past crime. It was about capturing his intent to commit a future one. I needed to record him planning to harm me. That would be the final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle. I had to provoke him, to push him over the edge from paranoia into action. I decided to use the one thing he was truly terrified of: Leo Vance. One evening, I was idly scrolling through a news app on my tablet while he sat opposite me, pretending to read a book, but actually watching my every move. "Oh, that's a name I haven't heard in a while," I said, my tone casual. I tilted the screen towards him. It was a small, insignificant article about a local business grant. I had typed Leo Vance's name into the search bar. Leo Vance, didn't he used to work with Mr. Finch? Mark's face went rigid. He put his book down, his knuckles white. "Where did you hear that name?" "It was on that client list of yours I was looking at the other day," I lied smoothly. "I was just curious. It said he was charged with embezzlement, but they dropped the charges. Seems a bit fishy, doesn't it?" "It's none of your business, Sarah," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I don't know why you're suddenly so interested in my work." "I'm not interested in your work, Mark," I said, meeting his gaze. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm interested in the truth. Things haven't been right with you for months. The secrets, the lies, that meeting with Claire." I was laying my cards on the table, but not all of them. I was showing him just enough to make him panic. He stood up, towering over me. "You don't know what you're talking about. You need to stop this, for your own good." The threat was veiled, but it was there. It hung in the air between us, shimmering and ugly. "Or what, Mark?" I whispered, letting a tear slide down my cheek. I was playing the part of the hysterical wife, the woman on the verge of a breakdown. "What will you do?" He just stared at me, his face a mask of cold fury, then turned and walked out of the room. A few moments later, I heard the door to his office close. I knew he would be on the phone to Claire. I gave it a few minutes, then crept to the office door, my own recorder active in my pocket. I could hear the muffled sound of his voice, angry and strained. I couldn't make out the words through the thick wood, but I didn't need to. I had a bug planted in the heart of his sanctuary. The waitin' was the worst part. I went to bed, leaving the light on, pretending to read. I felt like a tethered goat, waiting for the tiger to strike. He didn't come to bed for hours. When he finally did, he didn't touch me. He lay on his side of the bed, a rigid, hostile presence in the darkness. The next morning, his demeanor had changed completely. The anger was gone, replaced by a chilling, solicitous calm. He made me breakfast. He told me I looked tired and stressed. "I think you've been working too hard, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. You've been imagining things." Getting all worked up over nothing, he was gaslighting me, trying to build a narrative of my mental instability. It was a classic move, and it terrified me. He was laying the groundwork. If something happened to me, who would question it? The stressed, paranoid wife who had a tragic accident? The wife who was so overwrought she took too many sleeping pills? That afternoon, he came home from work early. He was carrying a small paper bag from a local health food store. "I got you something," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It's a special herbal tea. The lady in the shop said it's amazing for stress and anxiety, helps you sleep too." He pulled out a box of Tranquil Night tea. The box was decorated with serene images of moons and sleeping flowers. It looked utterly benign. My blood ran cold. This was it. The first attempt. It was so cliché, so textbook. It would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. "Oh, Mark, that's so thoughtful," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I hoped he would interpret it as gratitude. "Why don't I make us both a cup?" His smile widened. "No, you sit down. You've had a long day. Let me take care of you." He went into the kitchen. I followed, standing in the doorway, watching him. My own recorder was on, nestled in the pocket of my cardigan. He filled the kettle, took out 2 mugs, our matching mugs, the ones Lily had picked out for us. He placed a tea bag in each one. Then he turned his back to me, ostensibly to get the honey from the cupboard. I saw his hand go into his pocket, a quick, furtive movement. He turned back around, a small vial, no bigger than his thumb, palmed in his hand. He uncapped it with a practiced twist, and shielding the motion with his body, tipped its contents into one of the mugs, my mug. He didn't see my reflection in the dark screen of the microwave, but I saw everything, the clear liquid, the quick, decisive action. The kettle whistled, a shrill scream that echoed the one in my own head. He poured the boiling water, the steam rising to momentarily obscure his face. He brought the mugs over to the kitchen table, placing the poisoned one in front of me. "There you go, love," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "Drink up. It'll make you feel so much better." I stared at the mug. The steam rose in a delicate, innocent plume. Inside that cup was my death sentence, delivered with a smile, by the man who had promised to love and protect me. My mind was racing. How do I get out of this? If I refuse to drink it, he'll know I'm suspicious. The whole charade will be over. I had to play my part to the end. I picked up the mug, my hands shaking. I raised it to my lips, my eyes locked on his. He was watching me, a predatory stillness in his posture. "You know what?" I said, forcing a small laugh. "I'm so clumsy today." And with a flick of my wrist, I accidentally knocked the mug. It flew from my hand, crashing onto the tiled floor, the hot, dark liquid and shattered ceramic spreading in a wide, ugly pool. "Oh no," I cried, jumping back. "I'm so sorry, Mark." I can't believe I did that. For a split second, his mask of concern dropped. A flash of pure, unadulterated rage crossed his face. It was there and gone in an instant, but I saw it. It was the face of the man who had severed Alistair Finch's brake lines. It was the face of a killer whose plan had just been thwarted. He recovered quickly, his features rearranging into a look of mild annoyance. "It's fine, Sarah. It's just a mug," but his voice was tight, strained. He knelt to clean up the mess, his back to me, his shoulders rigid with fury. I stood there, my heart hammering, the recorder in my pocket, capturing the sound of his angry movements, the scrape of the broken pottery. The first attempt had failed, but I knew with a chilling certainty that there would be a second, and he would not be so careless next time. I had to retrieve the recorder from his office. I had to hear what he and Claire were planning. The end game was here. The spilled tea marked a turning point. The pretense of civility between us evaporated, leaving a raw, undisguised hostility. Mark's solicitousness was replaced by a cold, simmering anger. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were clipped and laced with contempt. He knew I had spilled the tea on purpose. He knew that I knew. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now it was a waiting game. Who would make the next move? My first priority was the recorder in his office. I had to retrieve it. I waited until he took Lily to her swimming lesson, a Saturday morning ritual. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I ran to the office. My hands were shaking as I reached under the desk, my fingers fumbling for the tiny device. It was still there. I pocketed it and raced back to my car, locking myself inside. It was the only place I felt remotely safe. I plugged the recorder into a small adapter for my phone and put in my earbuds. My breath plumed in the cold air of the car as I pressed play. His voice filled my ears, distorted and tinny, but unmistakably his. It was the conversation from the night I'd confronted him about Leo Vance. "She knows, Claire. I don't know how, but she knows." She mentioned Vance by name. His voice was tight with panic. Claire's voice was sharper, colder. "Calm down, Mark. Hysteria won't help." What exactly did she say? She said she saw his name on a client list. She's been asking questions about Finch, about you being in town. She knocked over the tea. It was deliberate, I'm sure of it. She's not just suspicious anymore. She's digging. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of Claire lighting a cigarette. "Then you have to handle it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Handle it? What do you think I was trying to do?" "She's watching my every move." "Then you need a better plan," Claire snapped. "Something that doesn't look like you're handling it. Something that looks like she handled it herself. She's stressed, isn't she? Paranoid? Unstable?" "I've been laying the groundwork," he admitted, "telling people she's not been herself." "Good. Then we use that. Her heart medication." My blood froze. Lily's medication. No, she meant mine. I had been prescribed a mild beta blocker years ago for anxiety-induced palpitations, a prescription I rarely filled anymore. "What about it?" Mark asked. "What's the dosage?" Claire asked, her voice like a surgeon's. "I don't know." "A small white pill. I think it's 25 milligrams. Find out. And find out what a fatal dose would be." A distraught, unstable wife, overwhelmed by stress, takes her own life. She empties the bottle. It's tragic, but it's clean. No one will question it, especially after you've been telling everyone how worried you are about her mental state. A long silence. I could hear Mark's ragged breathing. Even he, the man who had murdered for money, seemed shocked by his sister's cold-blooded efficiency. "I have a new prescription for her," he said finally, his voice low. "It's at the pharmacy." I was supposed to pick it up for her. "The bottle will be full." "Perfect," Claire said. "It's better this way, Mark." "It's foolproof. She's become a liability we can't afford, especially now with Vance making more noise. Once she's gone, we pay him off one last time with the insurance money, and it's all over." The insurance money, my life insurance. A policy we'd taken out years ago, enough to pay off the house and secure Lily's future. He wasn't just going to kill me, he was going to profit from it. "When?" Mark asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Tonight," Claire said. "Lily's at her sleepover. The house is empty. Don't wait. Don't give her another chance to get smart. Do it tonight." The recording ended. I sat in the car, the silence deafening, the cold seeping into my skin. Tonight. They were going to kill me tonight. And they were going to make it look like I had killed myself. The plan was horrifically perfect. I was a cornered animal, but the survival instinct that had been simmering for weeks now roared to life. I would not be their victim. I would not let them orphan my daughter and get away with it. I had the recording. It was everything. It was motive. It was conspiracy to commit murder. It was the nail in their coffin. But it was no good to me if I was dead. I had to get out of the house. I had to get to the police. But I couldn't just run. If I disappeared, they'd change their plan. They'd hunt me down. I had to let them walk into the trap. My mind raced, forming a desperate, terrifying plan. I drove to a nearby 24-hour copy shop. I bought a small padded envelope and a blank USB drive. Back in my car, I transferred the audio file of Mark and Claire's conversation onto the USB. I also transferred the photos of Alistair Finch's death scene from the hidden folder on my phone. Then I wrote a short, simple note. "If you are reading this, I am either missing or dead. The contents of this drive will explain why. My husband, Mark, and his sister Claire are responsible. Please give this to Detective Miller at the town police department. He is the only one I trust." I didn't know a Detective Miller, but I needed a specific name to ensure it wasn't just handed to the front desk and lost in a pile of paperwork. It sounded official. It at the darn sounded like I had already made contact. I sealed the USB drive and the note in the envelope. Next, I drove to the hospital. Lily's cardiologist, Dr. Evans, was a kind, older woman who had cared for Lily since she was a baby. I knew she was working today. I found her in her office, catching her between appointments. "Sarah, what a surprise! Is everything all right with Lily?" she asked, her face full of concern. "Lily's fine," I said, my voice shaking. "But I need a huge favor. It's a matter of life and death." Mine, I handed her the sealed envelope. "I can't explain right now. But if you don't hear from me by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, please take this directly to the police. Don't open it. Just give it to them. Can you do that for me?" She looked from the envelope to my terrified face, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. "Of course, Sarah. I'll keep it safe." I felt a sliver of relief. The insurance policy was in place. Now for the trap. I went to the pharmacy and picked up the prescription for my beta blockers. The full bottle felt heavy in my hand. Then I went home. The house was a stage, and I was setting it for the final act. I took out the new bottle of pills. I emptied the real pills into a small plastic bag and hid it. Then I went into the kitchen and opened a bottle of aspirin. I carefully filled the prescription bottle with the identical-looking aspirin tablets. It was a long shot, but if he forced me to take them, it might buy me time. Finally, I took the second voice recorder, the one I'd kept in my pocket. I taped it to the underside of the headboard of our bed, right above my pillow. It was perfectly positioned to capture any sound on my side of the bed. I checked the battery. It was full. I was ready. Mark came home an hour later. He didn't have Lily with him. "Her friend's mom invited her for a sleepover," he said, not meeting my eye. I said it was fine. Of course he did. It was part of Claire's plan. The empty house. He was holding the small white paper bag from the pharmacy. I picked up your prescription, he said, placing it on the kitchen counter. The doctor said you should take it. For your anxiety. Thank you, I whispered. We ate dinner in silence, the air crackling with unspoken violence. My body was thrumming with adrenaline, but I forced myself to eat, to act normal, to act like the unsuspecting victim. After dinner, he said, "You look exhausted, Sarah. Why don't you go up and lie down? I'll clean up here. It was starting." I nodded, my legs feeling like lead as I walked up the stairs. I went into our bedroom and changed into my pajamas. I got into bed, my body rigid with fear. The recorder was a small, hard lump against the headboard behind me. I lay there, waiting. Time stretched and warped. Every creak of the floorboards downstairs, every distant siren was a prelude to my own murder. After what felt like an eternity, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He came into the room, not turning on the main light, leaving us in the dim glow of the hallway. He was holding a glass of water and the prescription bottle. My heart was a frantic drum. He came over to my side of the bed. "I brought you your pills," he said, his voice a soft, chilling caress. "And some water." He shook 2 pills out into his palm. Aspirin, thank God. But what if he had something else planned? "I don't want them," I whispered, turning my face away. "I feel fine." "Sarah, don't be difficult," he said, his voice hardening. "The doctor said you need them. You're not well. Just take them." He grabbed my chin, his grip surprisingly strong, and tried to force my mouth open. I twisted away, panic giving me strength. "No, I don't want them." "You need to calm down," he said, his voice turning into a snarl. He pinned my shoulders down on the bed with one hand, his weight pressing down on me. I was trapped. I could feel the recorder against the headboard, my silent witness. "This is for your own good, Sarah," he hissed, his face close to mine. His breath smelled sour. This was it, the final confrontation. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for justice, and I was not going to lose. He was stronger than I had ever imagined. The mild-mannered man who struggled to open pickle jars was gone, replaced by a brute fueled by desperation. His weight was crushing me, one hand pinning my arms above my head while the other tried to force the pills into my mouth. The aspirin tablets were a small comfort, but they were useless if he managed to suffocate me first. I thrashed beneath him, my mind screaming. The recorder. I had to keep him talking. I had to get his confession. I stopped fighting, going limp for a fraction of a second. It caught him off guard. His grip loosened slightly. "Mark, please," I gasped, letting a sob catch in my throat. "Why are you doing this?" "You know why," he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of rage I barely recognized. "You couldn't just leave it alone, could you?" "You had to dig. You had to ruin everything." "Everything," I cried, the question genuine. "What everything? Our life is a lie. You killed a man, Mark." His eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected me to say it so plainly. The confirmation was written all over his face. "You don't know anything," he stammered, his bravado faltering. "I know about Alistair Finch," I pressed, my voice gaining strength. "I know you cut his brakes. I know you did it for the Harrington account. And I know Claire helped you." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He had no idea how much I knew. He thought I had suspicions. He didn't realize I had the entire blueprint of his crime. "Shut up," he hissed, his panic making him sloppy. He glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to be listening. "No one needs to know about that." "But they will, Mark," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. This was my gamble. I had to make him believe I had a contingency plan he hadn't thought of. If something happens to me, everyone will know. I've made sure of it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" "What did you do?" "I left a full account of everything, Mark. The photos of the crash, the bank transfers to your little company with Claire, Leo Vance's name, everything. It's all in a safe place. If I die tonight, it all goes straight to the police." I was bluffing about the extent of the evidence I'd left with Dr. Evans, but he didn't know that. The mention of Leo Vance was the final blow. His face went ashen. He was trapped. The plan to silence me would be the very thing that exposed him. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was trying to convince himself, not me. "Am I?" I asked. "Is that a risk you're willing to take?" "Your whole life, your freedom, Lily. I'll bet on whether or not I'm bluffing." I saw the calculation in his eyes. The cold, methodical mind that had planned a murder was now weighing the odds. He was realizing his perfect, clean solution had just become impossibly messy. He let go of my arms, his body slumping. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The immediate physical threat was gone, but the danger in the room was still palpable. "What do you want, Sarah?" he asked, his voice defeated. "I want you to confess," I said, my voice cold and hard. I sat up, the headboard with its hidden recorder pressing against my back. "I want to hear you say it. All of it. Why you killed him, how you did it, how you and Claire have been paying off Vance." "I want it all. Why?" he whispered, looking up at me, his eyes full of a pathetic self-pity. "So you can destroy me?" "You did that yourself," I shot back. "I want a confession, Mark. A full one. And then you're going to give me Lily, and you're going to disappear. That's the deal. You give me the truth, and I don't release the evidence." It was a lie, of course. I would never let him get away with it. But I needed him to believe it. I needed the full confession on tape. He was silent for a long time, the only sound in the room our ragged breathing. He was a man standing on a cliff edge, and I had just kicked the ground out from under him. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he began, his voice barely audible. "The confession started as a trickle, then became a flood. He told me everything. The resentment he'd harbored for years against the effortlessly successful Alistair Finch, the mounting debts he'd hidden from me, the result of a few bad investments he'd made, trying to get us ahead. Finch's death wasn't just about the Harrington account, it was about covering his own financial failures. Claire had been the one to suggest it. She'd always been ruthless, he said, and she despised the way Finch treated Mark as a junior subordinate. She'd found Leo Vance, the disgruntled, greedy logistics clerk, who knew Finch's schedule and the lonely back roads he liked to take. Vance had been the lookout. Mark had done the deed himself in the dead of night, a week before the accident. He described severing the brake line with a pair of cutters, his hands shaking, the metallic smell of the fluid. He talked about the blackmail, how Vance had secretly filmed him that day, and had been bleeding them dry ever since. The insurance money from my death was supposed to be the final payment to make him go away for good. He talked and talked, the words spilling out of him, a torrent of poison that had been building for years. He wept, not for his victim, but for himself, for his ruined life, for the man he was supposed to be. I listened, my face a mask of stone, my heart a cold, hard knot. Every word was a golden thread, weaving the noose that would hang him. The recorder behind my head was my silent, perfect witness. When he was finally done, his voice raw, he looked at me with hollow eyes. "There, are you happy now?" Just then, a noise from downstairs, a door opening and closing. Both of our heads snapped toward the bedroom door. "Who's that?" Mark whispered, a fresh wave of panic on his face. Footsteps on the stairs, not the heavy tread of a police officer, but the sharp, quick click of a woman's heels. The bedroom door swung open. It was Claire. She was dressed in black, her face pale and drawn in the dim light. She was holding a key in her hand, a key to our house. "I got your text," she said to Mark, her voice tight. "I came as soon as I could." "What's going on? Is it done?" She hadn't seen me at first, half hidden in the shadows of the bed. Her eyes adjusted, and she saw me, sitting up, very much alive. Her composure shattered. "What is she doing here? Mark, what have you done?" Mark scrambled to his feet. "She knows, Claire. She knows everything." Claire's eyes darted between us, her mind working furiously. She saw the defeated slump of her brother, the cold resolve in my eyes. She knew in that instant that the plan had failed. "You idiot," she hissed at Mark. "You weak, pathetic idiot. I told you to handle it." "He tried," I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. Both of them turned to look at me. "He tried to poison me with tea. Then he tried to force pills down my throat. He even confessed to everything. Didn't you, Mark?" Claire's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. She turned on Mark. "You confessed? You told her everything?" Before Mark could answer, the room was flooded with light. The bedroom door, which Claire had left open, was now filled with the silhouettes of two police officers, their hands on their holstered weapons. "Nobody move," a calm, authoritative voice commanded. My heart soared. Dr. Evans. She hadn't waited until morning. She must have listened to her instincts. She had saved my life. One of the officers was speaking into his radio. The other one looked at me. "Ma'am, are you Sarah?" I nodded, tears finally streaming down my face. "Yes." Mark and Claire were frozen, their faces illuminated in the flashing red and blue lights from the police cars that were now pulling into our driveway. They looked like startled animals caught in the headlights, their conspiracy, their whole sordid, murderous world, collapsing around them in an instant. Then, the officer's eyes fell on something in my hand. I had, without realizing it, picked up my phone. I pressed a single button. Mark's voice, tinny and distorted, filled the room. "I cut his brakes. I did it for the Harrington account. Claire helped me. Vance has been bleeding us dry." It was the recording from my pocket, the one I'd made of myself and Mark just moments before. But it was enough. Claire let out a strangled cry. Mark just stared, his mouth agape. The game was over. The trap had been sprung. The truth, in all its ugly, brutal detail, was finally out. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of blue uniforms, crackling radios, and the sharp, emotionless language of law enforcement. Mark and Claire were separated, read their rights, and led away in handcuffs. Claire was venomous, spitting insults at her brother, at me, at the officers. Mark was silent, a hollowed-out man, his face a gray mask of utter ruin. He didn't look at me once as they put him in the back of the squad car. It was as if I no longer existed. I sat wrapped in a blanket on my own sofa while officers moved through my house, which was now officially a crime scene. The bedroom was cordoned off. They took my phone, the recorders, the bottle of aspirin disguised as my medication. They took everything. I gave my statement to a calm, patient detective. His name, by sheer coincidence, was Miller. I told him everything, from the moment I saw Mark on High Street to the final terrifying confrontation in the bedroom. I told him about the USB drive I had left with Dr. Evans. He made a call, and within the hour, another officer arrived with the padded envelope. They had it all. The confession, the corroborating evidence, the motive. The perfect trap had yielded the perfect conviction. When the sun rose, casting long, pale fingers of light through the living room window, the house was finally quiet again. A uniformed officer was stationed outside, but the chaos had subsided. I was alone in the silence, the events of the night replaying in my head like a film. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a deep, cavernous wound. The man I had loved, the father of my child, had tried to murder me for money. My sister-in-law, a woman I had shared holidays and family dinners with, had masterminded the plot with chilling pragmatism. My entire world, the very foundation of my identity, had been built on a bedrock of lies. The greatest casualty in all of this, I knew, was Lily's innocence. How would I ever explain this to her? How do you tell a child that her father and her aunt are monsters? I didn't have the answers. All I had was a fierce, primal need to protect her, to build a new world for her, a world where she would be safe and loved, a world free of the poison that had contaminated our lives. My sister arrived a few hours later, her face etched with worry. She had been called by the police. She wrapped her arms around me, and I finally broke. I sobbed until I was empty, grieving for the life I thought I had, for the man I thought I'd married, for the future that had been stolen from us. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media attention. The story was a local sensation. The investment advisor, the sister, and the murder plot. The press camped outside our house. I sold the house almost immediately for far less than it was worth. I couldn't stand to be in it for another moment. Every room held a ghost. Mark and Claire's trial was swift. With the recordings, the digital evidence from Mark's phone, and Leo Vance, who had quickly turned state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence on blackmail charges, their defense was non-existent. They tried to blame each other. Mark's lawyer attempted to paint him as a weak man manipulated by his sociopathic sister. Claire's lawyer argued she was merely trying to protect her brother from my unstable and blackmailing behavior. The jury saw through it all. They were both found guilty. Conspiracy to commit murder, and for Mark, the murder of Alistair Finch as well. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I looked at Mark, and for the first time he met my gaze. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a cold, empty hatred. He hated me, not for what he had done, but for the fact that I had outsmarted him. I had beaten him at his own game, and that, to a man like Mark, was the ultimate crime. After the trial, the noise finally began to fade. I took the insurance money from my own policy, the one he had intended to cash in on, and the proceeds from the house sale, and I moved with Lily to a small, quiet town by the sea, hundreds of miles away. We started over. I found a small cottage with a garden, and we got a dog. I told Lily a simplified version of the truth, that her father had made some very bad choices and had to go away for a long time, and that we were starting a new adventure, just the two of us. There are nights when I lie awake, listening to the sound of the waves crashing on the shore, and the fear returns. A phantom chill that reminds me of how close I came to not being here. It reminds me of the darkness that can hide behind a familiar smile, the rot that can fester beneath a tranquil surface. But then I think of my own journey. I think of the woman I was, the trusting, slightly naive wife, and the woman I became, the woman who learned to listen to her own instincts, who found a core of steel within herself she never knew she possessed. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. I had fought for my life, for my daughter's future, and I had won. The world is not as safe as I once believed it to be, but I have learned that I am stronger than I ever thought possible. My resilience is the armor I now wear. The love for my daughter is the weapon I wield against the shadows of the past. One evening, months later, Lily and I were walking on the beach as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She was chasing the waves, her laughter echoing in the salty air, her face alight with pure, untainted joy. She was happy. She was safe. I watched her, and the last of the icy fear in my heart finally melted away, replaced by a quiet, profound peace. The life Mark had tried to extinguish had not only survived, it had been reborn, and in the quiet light of our new dawn, it was more beautiful and precious than ever before. We had found our way out of the darkness. The path ahead was our own, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely free. The moral of my story is not a simple one, not a neat platitude. It is a messy, painful truth that the people we love are capable of unimaginable betrayal. But it is also a story of strength, a testament to the fact that even in the face of the darkest evil, the light of truth and the fierce will to survive can prevail. You never truly know what you are capable of until you are tested. I pray you never have to find out the way I did. But if you do, I hope you find the same strength that I found, buried deep within myself, waiting for the moment it was needed most.